Welcome. This is Glenn, and you're listening to Wild Earth Conversations. Wild Earth Conversations is about engaging thoughtful individuals in meaningful conversations that connect their interests and insights to the vision of a thriving and beautiful planet. My guest today is Harvey Locke. Harvey Locke is a global conservationist, co-founder of the Y2Y plan, the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative, and the Nature Needs Half movement. According to Time magazine, he is one of Canada's leaders for the 21st century. Harvey is also a photographer and writer, as well as a worldwide lecturer and consultant on large landscape conservation, who has participated in numerous national and international symposiums, congresses, and forums on biodiversity and wilderness. Greetings, Harvey.
Hi.
Would you explain to us the meaning and purpose of the Y2Y initiative?
Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative is an idea about connecting animal populations up and down the Rocky Mountains in a way that the animals can live in the landscape along with us people, connecting these wonderful protected areas like Yellowstone National Park and Banff National Park in Canada, where I live, and to Glacier National Park and the Bob Marshall Wilderness and on up into the Yukon Territory, because that's the scale at which nature lives. And it's one of the great challenges of the 21st century to find a way to live alongside nature as opposed to dominating and eliminating it.
Do you see the Y2Y conservation initiative as a model for what needs to happen around the globe?
I like to think of Yellowstone to Yukon as the first of the next. The first meaning that our idea has caught on in the world, and many people have been interested in it. It emerged from the early days of thinking about landscape connectivity and parks not really working well as isolated islands. And there was an initiative called the Wildlands Project that was trying to promote this across the continent. And all of that sort of intellectual and scientific ferment from 30 years ago, and Yellowstone Yukon sort of crystallized it and then became the thing that people started to look at.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't applicable perfectly anywhere because everywhere is unique, but I think many of the things that we've done, learned, made mistakes on have been very important for other people to look at and then try to adapt to their circumstances. So we are now part of a global community of large landscape conservation efforts that we are happy to play an important role in. But of course, we have colleagues all over the world doing very important work in very important places too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Correct me if I am wrong, but it seems to me that the kind and level of protection involved in the Y2Y vision would not include grazing, logging, or mining on the land. Is this kind of protection going to be harder to achieve in other parts of the world, such as Africa, where everyday survival for many people depends directly on such economic activities?
So first I'm going to correct you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yellowstone to Yukon does not exclude those things. It also includes protected areas that do exclude those. But we don't purport to eliminate all of that from the landscape. But, the science is that we should be protecting in an interconnected way about half of the landscape, which leaves plenty of room for other things to occur, as well, as long as they're not destructive of other values. So that's a first thing that I'd like to clarify. And then in the context of Africa, where, I'm pretty familiar with some of it, there's opportunities to create elephant networks in southern Africa and major activities in that respect. There's an initiative called, let me just try to say the name. It involves connecting the Okavango Delta with the Zambezi River, and sometimes called Kaza. And it's quite analogous to what we want to do, adapted, of course, to the local circumstances. And there's large efforts to do things in the Congo Basin. There's efforts to restore connections between gorilla gorilla populations, a little different. Gorilla populations in Central Africa, sort of around Rwanda and Uganda and the DRC. So there's a lot of efforts in Africa that are quite comparable, again, each adapted to their own circumstances. But there's tremendous nature reserves in Africa that are spectacular and have all of their large mammals still in them.
Okay, I'm going to go on to question 3, but I just want to say that there might be a little redundancy in the questions because I write them before the interview, and that's a bit of a problem. I'm not sure yet how to get around that. So anyhow, here's question 3. You say that we need to protect half of nature to sustain all of nature, or at least 85% of all species. I know that the estimate of around 50% protected land and water is based on a lot of good science. Do you have any data or even an intuition about how much of this area needs to be protected as wilderness, as defined by the 1964 Wilderness Act, where the land retains its primeval appearance and where human activities are substantially unnoticeable?
Yeah, so the Wilderness Act is an American law, which is particularly well adapted to the United States. And of course, the Wilderness Act grandfathered in cattle grazing and mining, but generally those activities are not everywhere, just as things have turned out. But it's a very cultural specific statute. For example, in Canada, we have multiple wilderness laws, but we don't apply them exactly the same way that they're applied in the U.S., but they're out to achieve the same purpose. Wilderness, in my view, does not exclude humans if they're practicing traditional lifestyles in the landscape. But it does exclude logging, and I would say mining in our context, oil and gas, building dams, farming. All those things don't belong. Coming back to your question about how much of the world we need to protect, it's at least half, and it would be across the range of categories. And there's an international standard for categories, which includes 6 kinds, one of which is wilderness, 1A, but there's also national parks, there's areas that have special geological features, there's areas that have a bit more of a cultural dimension, and so on, wildlife reserves. And it's a mosaic of those things that would put nature first, that need to be interconnected across representative ecosystems, connected to each other, resilient to climate change, at a large scale across the landscape. And when you look at the various studies done around the world, they tend to come in around half. The 85% of species idea is from one theme of the scientific investigations called the species area curve, which is about how much space given species need to survive. I prefer to think about all species surviving, so not 85%, but 100%, and what their spatial needs are. But all of it is trending in the same direction.
All right. So when the Biden administration adopted the 30 by 30 initiative that the Trump administration has now rescinded, I read the report that was put out, and it struck me as a very weak concept or definition of protected land. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm afraid that the Biden administration's approach would not have been the gold standard for the global 30 by 30 goal. It's important to note that 195 countries have agreed to that as a global goal. The United States is not a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity, but the Biden administration considered it relevant and then did its Made in America version of 30 by 30. But other jurisdictions are using what I might call a standard more akin to that which I spoke about a moment ago to achieve that 30 by 30 goal. And I just saw a really interesting poll in the Guardian newspaper. They polled in 8 countries about the popularity of that 30 by 30 goal in South America, Africa, and so on, and found that there was a lot of public support for it all over the world.
Very good. I've heard you talk about the importance of Duck Creek as a crossing for grizzly bears. In America, the Fifth Amendment contains the right of eminent domain, which means that the government can take private property with just financial compensation for the common good. Do you have a comparable law in Canada, and are you in favor of using it to secure and protect critically important habitat, maybe the Flathead Valley in BC, for example?
Well, thanks for knowing about Duck Lake and the Flathead Valley in BC, because they're super important, not just for Canada, but also for the connection of wildlife with the United States. But the short answer is no, I'm not an advocate of using eminent domain, because I think we can achieve our goals voluntarily with willing sellers and willing buyers. Yes, we do have the equivalent legislative framework in Canada, but we've been very successful working on a willing basis with landowners and land trust colleagues to achieve the connections that we need in the landscape. And I think it's preferable from a social perspective for these things to be done in a cooperative way as opposed to a compulsory way.
Okay. I know that you think despair in the modern world is a huge problem, especially among young people. And you want to give hope by setting a new vision in motion. Is the goal to bring back something akin to what the world was like around 1800, at least with regard to wilderness and wildlife?
Thanks again for asking that question. I'm a co-founder of something called the Nature Positive Movement. And its objective for the world is to halt and reverse the loss of nature by 2030 from a 2020 baseline. In other words, improve things soon, stop losing, and then go from there to try to make things even better so that we're in a situation of humanity living in harmony with nature by around 2050.
Mm-hmm.
The 1800 idea is not really what we're about, because fixing a date of ideal conditions in the past is really fraught, because the conditions are highly variable around the world. So if you took Colorado in 1800, it would be in a desirable state from a point of view of wildlife all being there and the landscape being intact, and and that might make a little sense. If you took New England, there might, if the 1800s, there was a lot of forest clearing. And there's actually a bit more forest in New England today than there was in the 19th century. So you've got to, everything is kind of place specific. And we're not really trying to roll the clock back so much as we're trying to say the full range of species, the full range of natural processes need to be able to function together to give us a stable world that creates stability in the Earth system as a whole, that's also good for people.
Mm-hmm. You have also spoken about the importance of framing as a model for learning that is different from the Enlightenment model that relies very much on facts and arguments. Could you say a little more about this?
Sure. The Enlightenment model relies on facts and arguments within a frame. And the frame that it was based on was that we could discover everything through the application of reason. I am still a huge believer in that. It's just that's not how humans work fully. Humans primarily live narratives. They don't live science. They don't hand off their judgments about how the world should be to scientists. They make value decisions. So what the value system is that animates the conversation in society is narrative driven. So if you believe, as I do, that we should share the world with the rest of life, that we have big problems that we've created for ourselves by changing the climate, by overusing our rivers, by overusing our soils, by not leaving enough room to roam to other species, and that we need to find a new way to live in harmony with nature. That's a narrative that I'm trying to work with others on encapsulating in the concept of a nature-positive future, where we flourish along with nature. Mm-hmm. Other people are pursuing other narratives, such as climate change is a hoax, the world is here for humans only, when we use this planet up, we'll fly to Mars. I wish these weren't literal, but they are, as you know. And, fundamentally, that's a worldview I reject. I think it's dangerous. But it's also a narrative. So I believe in the framing the story in the most positive way that invites people to join in a desirable future, and that we all sort of get behind the oars and row the boat together in the direction of something that we want. And in the past, sometimes conservation environmentalism has been in the sort of don't do this frame, don't do that frame. And we're trying to shift that to a let's do this frame, which includes doing a bunch of great things and not some other things we don't want.
Mm-hmm. You have said people love nature. Do you think that cultivating our love for nature is the most fundamental and pressing task of our time? And what do you say to those who focus on social justice and equality issues?
Well, nature is the context for all life. Everything humans do depends on the functioning of the Earth system, including social issues, including economic activities. I see the world hierarchically. We have the Earth and everything within it as the encircling sphere. Then inside that is human society, which includes social matters, family, ambitions, choices, and economic activity, and then embedded in that economic activity is just one subset of society. So the hierarchy is Earth, humans, economy. The economy being the lowest part of the hierarchy. And it's only there to serve people. So when we're thinking about the economy, we should be thinking about how it serves people and our social goals, because it serves no other purpose. But no amount of social activity can change the hard truth that we are fully dependent on the functioning of the Earth system for the water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we eat. The world is not a negotiation between the environment and people. There's a hierarchical dependency where the functioning of the planet decides the well-being of people. Full stop. And therefore, it's wrong to see these as competing interests. They should be seen as hierarchical interests. And everything anybody does ever should be about living within the Earth system, the means of the Earth, and not harming the fundamental life system, because we can never meet social goals if we do that. We can never meet any other goals if we do that. And it's not a competition. It's a question of getting the conceptual framework correct. And love of nature is a great way for people to embrace and enjoy and appreciate that ironclad reality.
Okay. Well, I think you answered this next question, but I'll go ahead and put it to you, and maybe you have something further to say on it. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission says, as you know, that reconciliation between people requires reconciliation with nature. Do you think that war and genocide can be stopped through creating a half-wild world?
What an interesting question. I think the misery we inflict on each other through wars or the horrors of genocide have to do with us not having our value system right. I've tried to think of a world in which we embrace each other, celebrate our differences, and look for commonalities that can drive us forward in some harmonious way that is enriched by difference, but unified by purpose. That would, if it were to advance well, take people out of the need to feel that they need to gain through war at the expense of others, or the horrors of them thinking they need to eliminate someone else to have what they want. But we could rather go forward in a good way. Now, let me be clear. I am not naive that I can wave a magic wand and all the things that are vexing the world today will go away. But if you have something positive to believe in, as sort of happened after World War II, when we began thinking of the government serving people, human rights, respecting territorial boundaries. While imperfect, that gave the world a lot more peace than it usually had. Now it feels like that's unraveling, which is horrific. We need to get something back that says we're all in this together.